Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us on the webinar today. This morning's session will focus on security and compliance considerations within Microsoft Teams, and delivering the content is our Cloud Solutions Specialist here at Bytes, Bruce Knight. Before handing over to Bruce, I'm just going to run through some very quick housekeeping with you all. You'll be muted, but you may submit questions anytime via the questions box on the right-hand side of your screen. And we'll have a short Q&A session at the end of the webinar where we'll read these questions out to be answered. The webinar recording will be made available to you. There's a feedback form at the end of the webinar. It'll just pop up. It's only a couple of questions. We do really appreciate your feedback on these sort of sessions. So if you could fill that out for us, and then we can send you a copy of the webinar recording. I'm now going to hand you over to Bruce, who is going to be presenting the duration of the webinar.
Thank you, Cassie. Good morning, everybody. Let me just put my screen on. Okay, so today we're going to talk, I guess, a little bit about security compliance as it sort of revolves around the Microsoft Teams application and services. If you've been with us on the last couple of webinars, our first one was more around the teamwork and collaboration experience from inside the Teams app and client. We then had a session around some of the sort of apps that you can leverage inside of Office 365 and Microsoft Teams to link to your teams and start to be more productive inside those teams as well. And I guess today we'll talk more around security and compliance. So we won't go too much into detail around that experience. So if you want to catch up and see those past webinars, we do have links available for those on our webinar events page. So you can go back there and have a look back at those couple of events. So today is all around, you might have started to use Microsoft Teams and starting to think around, have I secured the environment sufficiently? What are we doing for governance and compliance inside Teams? And we'll focus around some of these points that I have on the screen showing you today. I won't show you too many slides. I'll go into the actual tenant, show you where to set these things up, how to do it, and hopefully after the session you'll have a bit more confidence around how to secure your Teams environment. And make sure you just sort of, doing the things you should be doing in terms of how your users access Teams, what sort of things they're allowed to do in there, and how guests sort of collaborate with your users inside Teams as well. Of course, Microsoft Teams adheres to the same regulatory and compliance controls as the rest of Office 365 services. If you want to know more around that, there is a link. Is it refreshing on the screen there, Cassie? There it is. So you can go to aka.ms/SDP, and those two links are shown up on the screen. We'll be sharing these after the session, or you'll catch it on the on-demand webinar if you missed it. But you can go there and just find out exactly how Microsoft Teams is certified and what certifications and regulatory compliance controls they adhere to. I'm not going to go through all of these in detail. And of course, very importantly, the content around Teams, chats, channels, messages, voicemail, the documents and content you store inside those teams, all have data residency inside the UK. So I guess that's very important for some of our customers, and it's good to know that if you created your tenants in the UK, data residency for Teams all exists inside those UK tenants. So some of the capabilities that we'll talk about today, and all of these things that we'll go through are available, and you can configure and set them up already today. I won't be able to go into all of them into too much detail. We don't have enough time for that. But if you would like to sort of schedule a one-to-one session with either myself or one of my colleagues to go into more detail around any of these topics that we've spoken about before, feel free to contact your Bytes account manager or fill it in the form at the end of the survey or at the end of the session. So number one on the list there, archive. I'll jump into that and show you how that actually works in Teams. But if you've, say you're working on an ad hoc project, and that project only lasts two weeks or a month, and after that there's not much more you need to do with inside that team, you're able to archive the team and make it a sort of read-only capability. So users will still be able to go in, find and search data and content, but you won't be able to create new conversations or upload or change any content within inside that team. So it'll still be visible, but no changes will be able to be made. If you want to go in and find like specific messages, say you're going through a litigation and you need to find a specific search term from within inside a conversation that somebody had with another person in Teams or in a group chat, you can go into Content Search or eDiscovery Center and find those messages and export those and share them with your legal teams or litigation teams. So fully compliant with eDiscovery and Content Search. Auditing and reporting. It's a great place to go in and have a look at what happens within the team services. So who's created new teams, who's deleted teams, and maybe set up or create some alerts. So maybe you want to know every time somebody creates a new team and you want to be alerted to that fact, you can do that with inside the auditing and reporting piece within the protection.office.com portal. But I'll quickly show you where that is as well. So we'll do a little demo on that. Of course, access and management through Intune MAM, it plays an important role here. So making sure that the users that are connecting into Microsoft Teams are doing it in a compliant way, maybe from compliant devices. If they're not in supported networks, then perhaps you want to enable an MFA prompt for that user to get into Microsoft Teams. Or if they're a guest user coming into a team, maybe block downloads or restrict them from using the app, and they can only access the team via the web browser, for example. So all those sort of controls can be set up and configured through conditional access policies and Intune MAM policies. Moderator support, if you want to, you have a channel that's fairly busy or noisy and you just want a couple of owners of that team to moderate the channel, so they'll be able to go in and delete conversations or chats from other users within there, just to sort of keep an eye on what's going on and make sure that that the sort of rules are being followed within inside that team. You can set up a moderator for an individual channel within inside a team as well. Windows information protection policies. Perhaps you have business devices and you've installed Microsoft Teams. You can mark that as a sort of business application, and then if a user, say, goes and downloads a document from Microsoft Teams in a team channel, that'll also be marked as a business document and won't be able to share that document with other channels. So say upload it into his personal email, put it in a OneDrive storage location that's personal, or Box, or any other sort of non-compliant business apps. So you can control that through Windows Information Protection, which is mostly set up and configured through Windows Intune as well. Allowed list of apps, there's lots of different apps, and we kind of looked at some of those as part of the last session, but you as an admin can control which types of apps users can sort of add into their Microsoft Teams. So if you want to restrict some of those, you can make them unavailable to users to add into their teams as well. Retention and preservation, very important for a lot of organizations. If for example, you had a team or group and a user then deletes or tries to hide something that is maybe mentioned or said inside one of those teams or in a conversation, so deletes it if you've given them the capability to do that, or even deletes the entire team, and it was under a retention policy, you can go back into either eDiscovery or Content Search and find that content. So it will be retained either for a specific period of time or forever if need be. So you can set up those retention and preservation policies in the Security and Compliance Center as well. eDiscovery, of course, when you going through one of those litigation cases, you can go into the eDiscovery Center and do a search across the conversations, the chats, the content that's stored in that, create a new case, and potentially put something on hold from within inside that eDiscovery if you'd like to as well. Data loss prevention, one of the fairly newer capabilities from a security and compliance center perspective. You might want to prevent sensitive information from leaking outside of your team's group. So you may have a couple of teams that have external participants or guest users in it, and some sensitive information that you don't want to leak out of that channel. You can create a DLP policy, create your own sensitivity information types as well. So you might have specific keywords or regular expressions that you'd want to upload as a sensitive info type, and then potentially block anybody from using those sensitive info types within inside their conversations or chats or in the documents that they're sharing around within inside those teams as well. So nice thing is you can create a DLP policy and apply that across teams, chats, conversations, and the data that lives in the document libraries associated to those teams as well. Advanced threat protection. There are some scenarios, I guess, with Office 365 ATP that, you have guests inside those teams, and if one of those guests' credentials have been compromised, they would potentially have the ability to log into a team, go into one of the SharePoint document libraries, drop in a file that has a malicious code in it. And as a user, I see a new file there. I'm assuming that everything is trusted and safe inside that environment. Click on that file, and some bad things, I guess, could start to happen. So nice thing is that Office 365 ATP supports file attachments or files that are uploaded into Teams document libraries. So if that does happen, ATP will pick it up and in real time scan and protect the user from any malicious code that runs in that document. And I'll show you where to turn that on as well. Business information barriers is an interesting one. It's fairly new as well. Kind of gets set up and configured through PowerShell scripts, but it's a way to sort of set up ethical walls within inside your organization. So, for example, you might have a sales team and a research and development team, and you don't want to let the two teams talk to each other. You can set up and configure it so that when I'm in Teams as a sales representative, I won't be able to find a user from the R&D team. So we won't have that channel to communicate or collaborate with each other. If you need to set up those sort of ethical walls between two different departments within inside your organization, that is possible. It's interesting to sort of see how and where the content resides when you start to look at protecting the content within inside those teams. So this is a nice representation of Microsoft Teams. There's a chat service that lives in Azure somewhere. It then talks to those Office 365 services and one-to-one chat. So if you're having a chat with an individual, those conversations get stored in your mailbox, so that's able to be discovered or preserved through retention policies. Group chats will be stored in the group mailbox that gets created when a new team gets created, and so on. So, and obviously all the content then gets stored in SharePoint or OneDrive, depending on how you're sharing content around. But we'll go into a little bit more detail. I have just put in a little table to give you more information around that. It's nice to sort of refer back if while you're creating these DLP policies and retention policies, you might want to, you go and you're securing content and creating DLP policies, but just ensure that you're protecting SharePoint, OneDrive as well. So that's where the content's placed. So with that, let's jump into some demo. Trying to minimize this a little bit anyway. Okay, so I guess probably the first place you would start when looking at security and compliance for Microsoft Teams would be to go into portal.azure.com and start to configure some conditional access policies for your users that are connecting to Microsoft Teams. So really easy to go in, create a new policy. You might want to target this specifically to Microsoft Teams for a specific platform like iOS or Android or Windows, or include it into one of your existing policies that already exists for, say, SharePoint Exchange and some of the other services that run in Office 365. So to create a new conditional access policy, for Teams. You then go and select who this would affect. So perhaps you'd turn this on for all users that are connecting to Microsoft Teams. So here we can select the specific app that we want to use for this conditional access policy. And then what conditions? So, these users that we've selected, when they try and access Microsoft Teams, what do we want to happen, and how, what sort of access will they get when they log into those services? So this is where we have a couple of different conditions that we can set up and configure. For this one, we're just going to say, so what we'll do is when a user accesses Microsoft Teams from inside the corporate office or on the corporate network, they'll log straight in. But when they're accessing Microsoft Teams either via iOS or Android or Windows, and they're not in the corporate network, that they'll be prompted for an MFA. So here's where we can set up. So we'll include any location as a location, but then we want to exclude all trusted locations or a specific trusted location. For example, if you set up trusted IPs inside your MFA service, we'll tick that box. So that'll be your corporate network. Select that, say done. That's pretty much all we need to configure from a condition perspective. Then we can go into access controls, and we'll say that's fine. So anyone who doesn't access, who accesses Microsoft Teams off the corporate network, we'll grant them access, or you can block access, but we will require one of these. So maybe require multi-factor authentication if they're coming in from an unknown network. You could also couple that together with, say, device health or state if you use an Intune as well. So you might want to say, well, if it's a managed device, we'll let them straight in. If it's an unmanaged device, they'll also be prompted for a multi-factor authentication challenge. So we can select that. Turn the policy on. I won't do that now. And you've now sort of secured the way users access Microsoft Teams from, whether they're inside your corporate environment or externally. The next piece, and it's probably one of the things that I talk about most with customers, whenever an organization starts to adopt Microsoft Teams and it starts to get out there, they start to see sort of a team sprawl, I guess. So lots of teams get created. Initially, it's a new application within inside the organization. So all users are quite excited. They create their Microsoft Teams, and there's just, this plethora of Microsoft Teams running around in the organization. So, I talk to a lot of organizations, and they want to know how they can restrict and maybe just govern how Microsoft Teams get created inside their organization. So that's done through a group policy, and it has to be configured via PowerShell initially. So an easy way to sort of have a look at that is if you just sort of, you can do a search in Google or Bing and just look for how do you manage, you can create Office 365 groups. That'll give you the detail around how you can set that up inside your organization. There's a couple of, you can copy in this PowerShell script out, connect to the Azure AD, and then just run the script. It'll then, you have to create a group as well, but then anyone in that security group that you've identified will be able to create teams, and anybody outside that group won't be able to create teams. So I'll show you what that looks like from an end user perspective, but I guess it's good to know that there are some licensing requirements around setting up these restrictions for who can create groups and security groups for this. So the admin who configures these groups needs to have an Azure AD Premium Plan 1 license, and then the members of that security group who are allowed to create groups would also need an Azure AD Premium Plan 1 license as well. So just take note of that. But there's some additional features that you'll get if there are licensed for Azure AD P1 as well, and we'll talk through those. But if I go back into portal.azure.com and we have a look at groups. So in here, I've created an O365 group called Office 365 Group Creators. And then you have a couple of users. So these two users, Megan and Alex, are able to create new teams, and they have sort of the full functionality that they've always had. But then anybody outside of that group, when they go in and try to create a new Microsoft team, they won't be able to. So that kind of looks like this. So as Megan, she's part of the group. I can go in, join or create a team. So that still exists, and I can go in and create a team, and it's no problem. But if I'm logged in as another user, Adele, who's not part of that team, and I hit join or create a team, I can only join a team with the code. So there's no ability for me to create a new team. The other thing you might want to think about when looking at creating teams is how do you manage sort of the naming convention around teams. What happens after a certain amount of time if you want to expire teams automatically? Is there a way to do that as well? So there are some other settings that you can set up and configure as part of group creators or group management. So if we go back to groups inside Azure AD, you'll see there's a couple of settings that are available here, and these are also, unfortunately, I guess, Azure AD Premium Plan 1 features, but you'll have a look if you go to the expiration setting. This is where you can set up, if a team isn't being used, for example, there's a couple of teams out there, and initially they were used for some things, but then after a while they've kind of gone a bit stale and nobody's using them anymore. You can set up a group lifetime, so you can specify the number of days. When it gets to 30 days or 15 days before that time span, it will then email, send a notification to the group owners. If a group owner doesn't exist, you can specify who that must go to, and it's probably a good idea to set this up to go to a distribution list that includes a couple of admins, so they can all be notified that potentially a group will expire. Because then when that group expires, it will go in and automatically delete the SharePoint content, the Teams, Power BI, anything associated with that group. It's a good way to sort of keep a handle on the amount of teams that you have in your environment. But if you haven't set it up properly, and say the team owner doesn't exist or they've moved out, and you haven't set up this piece of ER, then potentially a team might get deleted, and that could be potentially something that you don't want to happen in your organization. So just make sure you set it all up correctly. You can select which groups you want this to apply to, or you can just say for all groups you want to have this sort of time span or group lifetime in the number of days applied. The next piece here is naming policy. So in some instances, you might want to restrict specific words when users create teams. So you can upload a block words list. So for example, in here, I've created a few block words and uploaded the file. But you can download a blank file, and it's just you input specific words that you don't want to allow users to use that as part of the name when they create a new team. So I've just put in a couple like CEO, HR, sales, and some other ones. And once I've uploaded this back into the naming policy, when a user tries to create a team that has CEO or HR or Batman in it, they won't be able to. So I'll show you what that experience looks like. If you're an admin, you can sort of circumvent this policy, but a general user as part of that Office 365 security group, they would have to adhere to that block words list. The other piece is around group naming policy. So if you want to have some structure around how teams are created, so it might be a bit easier for you to keep a handle on who's creating and setting up these groups, you can create specific prefixes or suffixes when a team gets created. And so there's lots of different attributes that you can access via this piece. So that could be, for example, in my policy, I've said to add a prefix and to use the attributes department. So when, for example, Alex or Adele creates a new team, and Alex is part of the marketing department, his team, he might call it, Project Y. It'll prefix for me his department name, so that would be marketing, I've also just used an underscore to sort of separate out the department from the group name. And so when he creates a group, it'll be marketing underscore whatever the name he chooses. You can also add a suffix to the end of that. So just to put a little bit of structure around those naming conventions. And so the experience for the end user would then look like this. So if I go back into Microsoft Teams, and so now I'm Alex and I want to create a new team. So I say create new team, build a new team from scratch. And this is going to be a private team. And in here I say, let's call this one, we want to call it sales. And you'll see it pops up here to say the name can't contain sales. And, so I won't be able to create this team with the word sales in it. And you'll see at the bottom here, it's already starting to show me what the actual team name is. So I could change this to, project Y, for example, and it will allow me to create it, but it's going to prefix it with marketing underscore. And something else that I've set up is classification of teams as well. So that's another piece you can enable through a PowerShell script. So that script looks something similar to this one. So you can also search online how to create classification labels for either SharePoint modern team sites or teams. It'll then give you some more information around how do you create classification labels for anytime a user, I guess, creates a new Microsoft team, a SharePoint team site, that they can then have the ability to classify what kind of information will be used inside that team. So, for example, I set it up to say internal, external, confidential, and highly confidential. And you can also then have a description for each one of these labels. So this is where you'd set the description. This is where you create the actual labels. It always hinges around this groups.unified object. But you open up PowerShell, run as admin, connect to Azure AD, get that string and group.unified, and then run these commands. And it's that easy. As soon as you set that up, you'll then have the ability to change the sort of classification for a site when it gets created. So over here, I can say, for project Y, this is a new project we're working on. It's confidential, and I can create that team. And you'll see when the team gets created, add some users into this team. You'll see that it shows confidential in the top right. And then, so what we've done is label this site as confidential. It's sort of in view of everybody who gets into the team. But you could also then set up some, I guess, scheduled PowerShell scripts or tasks that run daily to then, if a new team has been created with confidential, you might want to then restrict guest access into those teams or guest accounts or sharing externally. So then you can sort of start to do more with different sites within your organization based on how they've been classified. So it is nice that now you set these labels up and it's visible. So these classifications will appear inside when a new team gets created. But if I had to go into SharePoint Online, for example, I'd be able to, when I create a new team, set that classification as well. Okay, so the next part I just wanted to quickly show as well is, when I showed that list of things that you could do, top of the list there was how to archive a team. So that's something that you may or may not have seen. It's sort of not that visible when you create a team or when you go into team management. But if you open up your Teams client and you go down to the manage teams cog at the bottom here next to join or create a team, you have the ability to, if you're the owner, click on the three ellipses, the dots, and say archive team. And once you archive a team, so you see I have an archive team already, you still have the ability to view that team, search through the content. So I can still go into that archive team. I can see the conversations, but I can't create any new conversations, so that's blocked out. If I go to the Files tab, nothing in there for files, but if there were, the files within there would also be, let me see if I've got another one, yeah, into the launch channel, go back to files. So if I try and open this, I'll be able to go in and view it, but I won't be able to edit the file. So it kind of puts that whole team and all the content and the conversations and all the chats into a read-only mode, which is nice. So you can, the content in there might still be relevant, but the project's closed out. You don't need any more info being added to the team, but you still want to be able to reference it at some stage. So you can archive that team, go back in, search the documents, search the conversations if need be, but it is archived and sort of stored away under hidden teams, but you can find it still. So that's, from a identity and access management perspective. I'm going to jump now into some more settings that are available through the Security and Compliance Center. And to get there, you type in protection.office.com, and there's a couple of things I want to just highlight within here. So I spoke about the ATP safe attachments piece. If you go to threat management inside the Security and Compliance Center, click on policy, go to ATP safe attachments. This is an add-on license. So if you have Office 365 E3, you can purchase Office 365 ATP, or if you have E5, you'll have this capability already. But with inside the safe attachments policy, you'll just want to sort of tick this box over here that says turn on ATP for SharePoint, OneDrive, and Microsoft Teams. So if your policy contains that tick box now, if a bad actor or somebody managed to compromise credentials of a user, they drop in a file and share the link via Teams. And then any users that try and click on that file and open it, they'll be protected through ATP. So in real time, it will scan that file, check to see if there's any malicious code running, and then block it if need be. The other piece to have a look at with inside protection.office.com is to set up DLP prevention policy. So this is where you have specific keywords or sensitive info types that you want to protect. It might be personal information or data relating to GDPR, and you don't want any of that data to be leaked out through a Teams channel or team that's got guests in it, or just in a one-to-one chat, for example. And so within the policy here, it's easy enough to create a new policy, but I'll just show you one that I've already set up and created. So for example, this PII for Teams, I can go in and edit this policy. So there's a couple of different locations. I've turned this one on specifically for Teams chat and channel messages, but I could also have that same policy apply to all the different workloads with inside Teams. I can choose specific accounts to include and some to exclude if need be. But then the policy settings in here, I've said, well, if it contains sensitive info like UK driver's license, electoral roll number, and these are all out the box ones, credit card number, and then I also created my own sensitive info type called Watermelon, just to show you, that's easy enough to go in and create your own new sensitivity labels and then add those into DLP. So now if a user puts into a chat window any one of these sensitive info types, it will be blocked. So if I cancel that out and I go back into Microsoft Teams and I go into a channel, for example, so let's test this out. And the recipients will, let me see if I can show you two views so you can see, what it looks like from the person posting the message, and then from the other side of it, if I'm part of the team, what it looks like when that message gets blocked. So I'll just move that one to the side. I'll bring that up. So hopefully now if I, go in and I type in Watermelon or a credit card number or one of those sensitive info types, and I try and post that into a message, you'll see it sort of pops up briefly, and then passive DLP kicks in and it blocks it. So here I get this sort of message that pops up as the poster, and then as somebody who's part of that team in the actual conversation, I'll just see that there's a message that has been blocked due to sensitive content. But as the user, perhaps there's something in there that was maybe a false positive, and you can then enable the ability to override it and then still post it. You can take this piece out. So if you don't want the user or give the user the ability to override that, you can take this button away and just have this report to an admin if it's a false positive. But I could then go in here and say override it, but I have to put in a business justification before I can. And if I do that, I'll then be able to, the message will then sort of be unlocked, and everybody else will be able to see it again. So it's nice that you can, create these DLP policies, apply it across chats and conversations. So whether I'm in a team chat or whether I'm in a sort of one-to-one conversation with somebody, either a guest, the same would apply. So it works across your teams and your private chats. But then also you could apply it through to your content and documents as well. So that if I'm in SharePoint and I'm working on a file that's inside one of those teams, and I wanted to add a DLP policy to a document in there, and it picks up a sensitive info that's included, it will apply the same policies. So next, moving on to I guess retention after we've seen the DLP stuff. So just to set the scene a little bit, I guess. Previously, I had a team, and it's sort of based around this watermelon project that we've been working on. And a user created a team. They started posting some information, and this was potentially before I set up these DLP policies. And a lot of this information was flowing through these channels around this highly sensitive watermelon project. And then the user tried to cover up their tracks, deleted their messages, deleted the team, and hopefully they thought everything was good. But fortunately, as an admin, I had gone in and created some retention policies to retain all that data, so that even though those messages and content have been deleted, as a compliance officer, I'd have the ability to go in and actually retrieve that data through a content search. But to do that, we can go into information governance, retention, and I have a team's data retention policy set up already, but it's fairly easy to create a new one. Teams, next, and this is where you'll decide how long do you want to retain the data for. So for a specific period of time, and then when it reaches, say for example, 7 years, you want it to kick into a disposition policy. So after 7 years, then delete it after maybe a specific period of time. So you can have it retained for a specific period, or maybe just forever. So depending on your policies, it's something you can set up and configure. So once it's set up, and so just one more piece here. Sorry, let me show you where. Here you can slide across the Teams chats and Teams conversations. So make sure you have turned those pieces on, and then go through the rest of the policy and set it up how you want to. So, but that all gets done in retention. Once it's set up and applied, that'll then put retention policy across all the teams that you have created in Office 365, or it can be for specific ones only. And that's where maybe you want to leverage the classification labels and build in a PowerShell script that says if we find a classified site that we need to retain the data in that site. So you could do some more complex things like that if you need to. So now it's retained. As a compliance person, I could either go into eDiscovery, create a new case, or I just want to do a search for some content, and I've sort of teed up the search already. So I've gone in, created a new content search, typed in the word watermelon, and it's found all the data relating to watermelon. So this could be, for example, there's a document that was created and uploaded into a team document library. I can see there was an IM from Alex, and that was to the marketing _beta testing team. just talking about, watermelon here, and some more evidence around these users sort of, I guess, speaking about things that perhaps they shouldn't have been doing specifically because there may have been teams or guests involved in that team. Once I've finished with the content search, I'm able to export the content. So you might want to export all that data relevant to that search and then hand it over to somebody to investigate further. So that's totally possible. But then, once you have all that sort of in place, even though a user creates or deletes a team, you can still find the content and export it. So either through a content search or an e-discovery specific case that you create. The other piece that's a nice place to go and have a look, I guess. So I spoke about Audit Log Search. So this is where you might want to just do some investigation, I guess, around who's created new team sites, just some activity that's been going on inside Microsoft Teams. So you can click on here, type in Teams, and then just sort of have a look at all the Microsoft Teams activities. Let's take that one out. And you can do a search, which will bring back then over the specific period of time, all the activity. So user signed into Teams, change team setting, general channels. So user signed in, deleted a team. So this was that marketing beta test, underscore beta test team that was deleted. So we can see that was deleted on the 24th, but I could still go in and find the content through a content search. So this is a great place to go in. And then also, if need be, create a new alert policy. So you might want to set a new alert policy up to say, when anybody creates a new team, send an email to an admin. And so then when that activity gets triggered, an alert policy will get fired off and then the email will get sent to the administrator. So you can sort of, instead of going in here and sort of searching every day, you can just set up a few alert policies so that you get notified through email when something specific happens that you want to sort of monitor or track. So a great way to keep on top of that. The last sort of piece I wanted to check off on was just going into the Microsoft Teams dashboard itself, and just a couple of things in there that you might want to take note of. And so we can jump into Microsoft Teams. And so things to have a look out for from within Microsoft Teams Admin Center. There's one or two settings in Manage Teams, team policies that you want to have a look at. And there's actually picked this up the other day. There's a new feature coming relatively soon. It's not available just yet, but I have noticed it's showing up in Teams policy. So in here it says create private channels. So this is something that a lot of users have asked for. And it's on roadmap, I think, to be released either the end of this month or next month. And so what that means is that you could create a team with multiple channels, but you can make some of those channels private. So you might have a channel within inside a team that only 2 or 3 users will have access to, and the rest of the users can't go into that channel and view or read those conversations, but they'll have access to the rest of the team. And so when that sort of feature gets made available within the tenant, this is where you can turn the ability off on over there. And just also, if you want to allow users to discover private teams, you can flick the switch in to the global teams policy if you want to. A couple of other places you want to have a look. If you go into meetings, this is where you can set some meeting specific policies. And this is where, for example, when a user or an external participant joins a meeting, do you want them to go straight into a meeting? Do you want to allow them to share screen, and just to sort of govern what happens inside your meetings? So this is something that potentially you might want to change, so you could have automatically admit people, or just people in your organization will get admitted, or everyone in your organization plus federated organizations. and whether or not you want to let anonymous people start a meeting. So these are a couple of things that you can set up for as a global policy. There's a few of these things that can be set by an individual user as well. So if I'm a user and I go and create a new Teams meeting, I can go into the options URL there and then say, change these pieces here if I want to. But you might want to just have a default global policy that sort of overlooks all of that. And in here you can, there's lots of different settings you can set up for meeting policies. And the same goes for live events as well. Message policies. One or two things you might want to take note in message policies is, do you want to allow users the ability to delete messages? So either only owners or any user can delete their own sent messages or edit sent messages. So you could turn this off if you want to not allow users to do that. The Giphy content rating, this is where you can say strict, moderate, and no restrictions, just to sort of manage what kind of Giphies are available through Microsoft Teams. Memes, stickers, all those things can be turned off through these messaging policies within inside the Teams Admin Center. The last few pieces to have a look at would be under organizational wide settings. This is where you can define whether or not users can invite external people into the organization. So the difference between external access and guest access. External access is more, you can think about it as, being federated with other organizations so that you can find, say, a partner or vendor. You can have a one-to-one chat that can be included in group chats. But similar to that Skype for Business experience where you search the user and you have a chat with them. Guest access is allowing that guest into your team and giving them access to not just the sort of chatting experience, but also all the content that's stored in the team through that document library in SharePoint, and sort of you can see them as a user, but they'd have to log into your team and then they could go in and be a sort of full participant of that team. And that's where you can sort of turn on and off that switch over there. And then you can do some more specific things around guest access and what they can and can't do. So you might want to have a look at those pieces as well. The last piece is just, I guess, around where content is stored. So when you go into Teams and you create a new team, you have the ability to connect third-party cloud sort of services for file storage. And if you don't want to allow that, then you just want them to use SharePoint for Teams and OneDrive for Business, you can flick off these dials over here so that they can't connect Google Drive, Box, Dropbox, or ShareFile to their team and can't use that as a storage location for the documents that you're working on with inside a team. And I guess there's, like I said, there's a lot more that you can kind of consider as part of these. We're pretty much out of time right now, so I hope it's been valuable and you've learned one or two things. But like I said earlier, if you want to have a more in-depth sort of engagement around some of these points, we're happy to come in and do a sort of one-to-one more in-depth session to go through any of these points in more detail if need be. So just reach out to your Bytes account manager or fill it in the survey after the session, and we'll set one of those up with you. So thank you for your time, and with that, I'll hand back over to Cassie.
Thanks, Bruce. I'm just going to open up the questions box just to see if we've got any questions. So, someone's asked, can you turn off OneDrive if this is restricted in the business?
So I mean, I guess if you've blocked OneDrive, so from a site collection perspective, it's not easy just to turn off OneDrive as a service because there's no sort of checkbox when you configure the license. But there are ways to sort of block it for users so that they can't access OneDrive. The things that will be affected then is if you're in a one-to-one chat and I want to share a file with that user, that gets stored in OneDrive for Business. And so in one-to-one scenario, they wouldn't be able to upload and share files with each other. But you can block it. It's a bit of more of a a bit more difficult just to block OneDrive if you're still going to use SharePoint Online, because they're kind of tied together a little bit, but you can go into, there is a way to sort of disable the OneDrive piece if need be. Hope that makes sense.
Great. Yep. Another question. With group expiration, is that limited to one email address to be notified?
That's a good question. I actually haven't seen. You may be able to put in a couple. Let's have a quick look. It's separated by comma. Let's see what it says. Yeah, separated by semicolon. So you can have multiple addresses in that field if need be.
Great. If a team is expired, can you restore the data, or is the data searchable in security and compliance for investigations?
So if the team expires and it was under retention, you could export that data through an e-discovery or content search. But if it's deleted, I think you have 30 days to restore it. But after that, if it's under retention, you can still find the content, but you wouldn't sort of be able to rehydrate it back into Teams. You could get all the content out in the conversations. But after it is expired, I think you'll have it 30 days, and then after 30 days, you could do a content search if you had it under retention policy.
Okay. Can you enable communication so that Skype for Business users can talk with Teams users?
Yeah, so you can. It depends on the scenario. So there's different scenarios where a Teams user can talk to Skype for Business users, and that's depending on federation. So if it's a Skype for Business online user and it's a Teams user, and you can set it up so that Teams users can talk to Skype for Business users, and that can be across organization or within inside the same organization. Where it gets a little bit funny or sticky is if you have Skype for Business in a hybrid scenario, and you're not using Skype for Business online as the sort of source of identity, it is then, I don't think, possible to federate with users across Teams and Skype for Business. But if you say home to use an Office 365 in a hybrid scenario, that user will be able to federate and talk to users in Teams. But if they're still on-prem, then it's I don't think possible to chat across, but certainly from Skype for Business Online to Microsoft Teams. And there's a sort of matrix that you can go out and see, and they sort of list the scenarios on how federation works across Microsoft Teams and Skype for Business. You can do a sort of quick search around Teams, Skype for Business Federation, and there's a good TechNet article around that in more detail. You can't archive a channel specifically, no. So it has to be the whole team or nothing, unfortunately. And that's, I mean, it's the feature you're looking for. I'd say reach out to the user voice. So, all the services in Office 365 have user voice, and you can go and say, you want that feature, and if enough people are interested in it, then it could be something that gets added into the service. Like I say, around the private channels, that was something everybody was asking for, and now they're bringing it into Microsoft Teams as a feature.
Okay, great. We've got a few questions around sort of licensing, really. So, I mean, the best person to speak to would be your Bytes account manager, because they can then get the actual direct information for you, looping in the our licensing specialist here. But off the top of your head, Bruce, some sort of said, are some capabilities only available on E5?
Yeah, so the ATP stuff is an E5 feature. So Office 365 ATP to enable advanced threat protection for your teams. That little tick box that I checked in there is an E5 feature. Or you could be an E3 or an E1 user and just buy the Office 365 ATP add-on if that's all you need with inside the E5 plan. Instead of stepping up to an E5, you can, I think the 365 ATP license is just over £1 or something. So rather than going all the way to an E5, just buy the add-ons and add those into your tenant. And there's also The group convention, naming convention, block words, group creators type of, restricting who can create teams and those kinds of things are all part of Azure AD Premium, either via Enterprise Mobility and Security Suite, or you can buy Azure ADP Plan 1 as an add-on as well. So you could just buy that piece, or you could buy it as part of the EMS suite, or if you have Microsoft 365, either E3 or E5, you'll have that functionality. The other last piece that we didn't go into much detail about was the sort of ethical war piece, where you want to restrict conversations between two different departments in your team, and that's an advanced data governance feature, which is as part of E5, Office 365 E5.
Great. There are a few other questions, but due to time, I know that everyone values their time. I think it'd be best for us to get direct answers back to you guys. So I will follow up with the account managers and stuff and get the answers back to you. If you could just fill in the feedback form, we'd really appreciate it. Send you a copy of the recording so you can play back today's session, share with your colleagues, however you wish to use the recording. And also, if you were interested in a one-to-one session where Bruce and or his colleagues can come in to your offices and go into more detail around Teams or Microsoft 365 or whichever it is you're kind of interested in, then just pop that on the feedback form and we can sort of get something arranged for you, or a pre-call booked in just to discuss exactly what it was that you were interested in and sort of dates that are available for both parties. So thank you, Bruce, for delivering the content today, and thank you everybody for joining us, and I hope you all have a great day.